career ruined. I never thought I would become the kind of person who plots a calculated, meticulous revenge. Growing up, I had always imagined that if conflict arose, I would resolve it calmly or shrug it off. But sometimes, life puts you in a situation where your goodwill and patience are trampled on so thoroughly that you feel compelled to fight back. That is exactly what happened to me over the past few years. Let me set the scene as best I can while still keeping the details vague enough to protect my position. I work in it, employed by a large company that deals with enormous, complex projects. In theory, I'm not in a managerial role right now. However, my formal contract level is high. If the higher-ups placed me in a management seat, I'd have the authority to oversee hundreds of people. That is not an exaggeration. Just the reality of how this company grades its employees. I am, by all measures, an expert in a niche area that the company desperately needs. They know it, I know it, and that has always given me a certain degree of leverage, and ironically, job security. I identify as someone with a vengeful streak, maybe an 8 out of 10. In day-to-day life, I try not to let that side dominate. I'm generally a patient person, especially at work. I never aim to stir up drama or create tension just for the sake of it. My typical approach is to do my job quietly, treat people with respect, and hope they do the same. But that can fail miserably if you are dealing with people who see kindness as a sign of weakness. That brings me to Mark. He is, or was, a more senior colleague who was assigned as my mentor when I joined the company a few years ago. Mark had knowledge about certain internal systems and processes, so leadership decided he should guide me. At first, I looked forward to the mentorship. Unfortunately, from day one, Mark behaved like a bully. He would stand up in front of coworkers, often in open office spaces or group chats, and yell at me, insult my work, or attack my competence. If I made a small error, he would blow it up into a monumental offense. If I succeeded at something, he dismissed it as luck or refused to acknowledge it. Even when he wasn't insulting me to my face, I later discovered that he went around telling other departments that I was lazy, incompetent, or out of my depth. For a while, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was new. Maybe I needed to earn Mark's respect. I had some fear that if I questioned him publicly, no one would believe me, or they would think I was stirring trouble. So I stayed silent. But silence took its toll. Every time he yelled or insulted me, my mental health slipped a notch. I would come home from work feeling drained, replaying his words, questioning whether I had done something to deserve such contempt. Over time, I decided to do something constructive. I began keeping a diary, an old-fashioned pen and paper diary, documenting every incident, the date, the time, what happened, who was around. It was my own private log. I didn't plan to share it, but I wanted to preserve the details in case I ever needed them. 6 months into my role, I was assigned to a massive new project, one that spanned the entire organization and included thousands of people. It was the company's crown jewel, a large-scale, multi-year endeavor that carried huge weight. Within my sub-team, I was the only person holding a specific role related to my niche expertise. That gave me some significance. If they lost me, it wouldn't be easy to find a substitute. The project manager for our portion of the bigger project was a woman we'll call Sarah. Up to that point, Sarah and I had communicated briefly by email, and I had found her a bit brusque, but I did not know her well enough to form a deeper opinion. The moment we began working together in earnest, Sarah treated me like an adversary rather than a colleague. It started with small behaviors, cutting me off in meetings, ignoring my input in scheduling decisions. Then, at one of our first major gatherings, she openly questioned my competence in front of about 10 people, demanding that I explain the logic behind a routine decision. My logic was sound, but her approach felt ambush-like and humiliating. Whenever I talked, she interrupted me to say, "That's not relevant," or "This is your responsibility, right? Then handle it." The odd part was that these tasks she tried to dump on me clearly did not fit my role. I knew it, and so did a few others. But because she was the official project manager, many colleagues believed her, or at least didn't want to cross her. She used this confusion to push blame onto me if any slight delay happened. If a portion of the code shipping was late, even code I never touched, she would claim in official updates that I had not delivered some underlying component on time. This was false, but it was repeated so often that it became a sort of company lore. My mental health nosedived further. My diary entries became longer and more exasperated. Yet, I still worried about speaking out. I was new to this big project, and Sarah was established. As time wore on, the tension escalated. I tried to appeal to the department head for clarity. Is it my responsibility to do X or Y that Sarah demands? He typically shrugged. No, not really, but never did anything to intervene. Then, to make it worse, some of the big bosses decided that I clearly needed more oversight and appointed a manager to support me. In practice, it felt like they were simply monitoring me daily, forcing me to justify everything I did or didn't do. It was draining. In these months, I realized how a single manager with a hidden agenda could distort team dynamics so severely. Things took a huge turn for the worse when Mark, my long-standing tormentor, was added to the project. He had worked on parallel assignments until then, but eventually his skill set overlapped with something we needed. I happened to be on holiday when he joined the team. By the time I got back, the environment was volatile. On my very first morning meeting after returning, Mark verbally attacked me in front of a large Zoom call. You incompetent fool. You messed up your tasks again. Now everyone has to scramble. He shouted so loudly that even other participants flinched. My patience, already stretched thin, snapped. I threatened to beat the living daylights out of him. That wasn't my proudest moment, but it was raw frustration. If we had been in the same physical office, there's a chance I would have physically confronted him, which obviously would have ended badly for me. The immediate aftermath was regret for losing my composure. I prided myself on calm and logic, but in that moment I became the aggressor. People on the call looked stunned. Later that day, I found myself boiling with anger, thinking of driving to Mark City to confront him, but a better voice in my head urged me to do something more strategic. I remembered the diary. For 6 months, I'd meticulously recorded Mark's antics. I had a partial account of Sarah's behavior as well. I decided it was time to bring everything out into the open. I wrote a detailed email, pages long, to HR, copying my team leader, Mark's and Sarah's team leader, plus multiple managers, including the manager above them. In this email, I recounted every instance of Mark's verbal abuse. I described how Sarah systematically pinned every single task or delay on me, no matter how unrelated. I polished a few details in places, in the sense that I presented them in the worst plausible light. For Mark, I even touched on something I had suspected was illegal. I never outright said he did it for sure, but I implied strongly, given Mark's statements and evidence, I am 90% sure he's engaged in misconduct that could place the company at legal risk. That last angle was not entirely baseless. I had overheard Mark's bragging about certain shady deals and internal manipulations, so I used that knowledge. If Abt thought there was even a slight chance Mark's conduct was illegal, they'd be forced to investigate more thoroughly. The email was nuclear, in effect. I responded quickly, telling me they would investigate, but they also asked me to come in for a formal discussion. My superiors expressed shock, either feigned or real. I demanded that Mark and Sarah face disciplinary action, and that they publicly apologize to me for their misbehavior. Of course, HR refused that last part, saying it would create a hostile environment or lead to more friction. I suspect they also realized that an enforced public apology might provoke Mark into losing control again, possibly leading to an ugly meltdown. They wanted to avoid that drama at all costs. Still, our pledge to investigate thoroughly. They also suggested I move off the big project for my own mental well-being. I refused. This project was crucial to my professional growth, and I wasn't willing to let Mark and Sarah drive me away from it. If anyone should be removed, I argued, it should be them, not me. What HR did not realize was that I was not done yet. The mention of Mark's possible illegal conduct was only in the email. I decided to up the ante by calling the company's legal office. I told them that Mark, in my estimation, was engaging in behavior reminiscent of a bigger scandal that had just hit the news. I made it clear that, if my suspicions proved correct, the company could face massive liability. The legal office had no choice but to open a file on Mark. At that point, fate handed me an unexpected advantage. Another scandal had just broken in our company, related to a colleague in another department who had indeed committed an illegal act. The executive suite was in panic mode, terrified that any new wrongdoing might worsen the public perception of our corporate culture. Riding that wave, I approached the legal office again, saying, in essence, you can't afford a second scandal. Mark's behavior is suspiciously similar to what was reported in that other case. They had little choice but to escalate their investigation. A few weeks later, the results of that legal inquiry came back. The verdict was that Mark did not engage in the specific wrongdoing I had alleged on the big project. However, while investigating my allegations, They uncovered that in other contexts, Mark had indeed carried out multiple illicit acts, abusing his position in ways that could have compromised the company. I still don't have the full details, but the gist is that he was meddling with internal systems in a way that violated regulations. Possibly it was tampering with system logs, or messing with data he had no right to. In any case, it was significant enough that the legal department concluded Mark had to face serious repercussions. Yet Mark wasn't fired, to my disappointment. The reason, I suspect, is that the company might be partially culpable in letting Mark's power go unchecked. Also, the HR and legal team might worry that if they tried to terminate him, Mark could turn around and sue the company, or expose further secrets that would damage them. So they found a middle ground, a formal warning, possibly a probation, something that would forever stain Mark's record and hamper his career prospects. And make no mistake, in a competitive environment like ours, a single black mark in your HR file can doom you to a dead-end tracker. From my vantage, that was almost as satisfying as a firing. He would remain physically present, yes, but severely weakened in standing. Meanwhile, Sarah's downfall came swiftly. About the same week the legal office delivered its findings on Mark, Sarah abruptly announced that she couldn't continue on the big project. For personal reasons. Those of us who had seen her tantrums and manipulations recognized what was really happening. She had been quietly removed to salvage the project's morale, and to preempt her from causing further chaos. The official line was that she was transitioning to another department, but we all knew. Some influential folks were relieved, sending subtle signals that they welcomed the change. Among my closer colleagues, a joke circulated. "Hey, what did you say to Sarah to make her vanish?" Everyone suspected I had a hand in it, but no one had direct proof of my maneuvering. So there it was. Mark was slammed with an HR write-up and discovered by legal to have done actual wrongdoing. Sarah got pulled off the most important project of her career. Both reputations took hits. In the corridors of the company, informal whispers said Mark would never again be trusted with high-level tasks. He might keep his job in the short term. He knows too many secrets and the company wants no lawsuits. But his career trajectory was effectively ruined. He would remain stuck in the background, overshadowed by the black stain in his file. Sarah, for her part, lost the big stepping stone that could have propelled her further up the ladder. Was I satisfied? A part of me felt relief and vindication. Another part recognized that this corporate warfare had eaten away at months of my mental well-being, forcing me to become someone I barely recognized, a person who logs every slight, hunts for any potential wrongdoing, and manipulates the system to bring others down doing. That is not who I wanted to be originally, but it's who I had to become to survive in an environment where bullies thrived, especially Mark. At the end of the day, I told myself I did what was necessary. I had to protect my professional standing, my mental health, and my sense of self-worth. If the company's culture had been healthier, maybe none of this would have escalated. Let me tell you the small ways it improved my daily life. The day after Sarah's resignation from the project, an interim project manager replaced her. I hadn't met him before, but in our first meeting he introduced himself, listened attentively to everyone's input, and assigned tasks rationally. No blame games. No piling random duties onto me. It felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders. I no longer dreaded project calls, anticipating a barrage of accusations. The new manager treated me with respect, which in turn let me show the best side of my expertise. And guess what? Productivity soared. Our sub-team started meeting deadlines more consistently. The hostility that had dominated my daily environment melted away. As for Mark, I began noticing he avoided me in the cafeteria or in group meetings. He rarely spoke up during calls. He still worked in a different city, so our physical paths seldom crossed. But whenever we were in the same remote meeting, he was unusually quiet, a shadow of his former self. He seemed to realize that if he tried to belittle me again, I might have no hesitation in filing a second formal complaint, and the company might not be so lenient next time. Some colleagues, the more perceptive ones, congratulated me in subtle ways. A friend from finance once whispered, "I'm glad you stood up for yourself." Zara was toxic. Another engineer said, "The project's a nicer place now. Thank you for not letting Mark's nonsense go." Those comments felt good, though I was discreet, responding only with a small smile. I never went around publicly gloating about what happened. Still, a small voice in me felt a twinge of regret that it had come to all this. I wondered if there was a path that avoided so much upheaval. Maybe if management had stepped in earlier, or if Mark had softened his approach. But in reality, Mark was never the type to back down gently, and Sarah's drive to blame others was too ingrained to vanish on a polite request. Sometimes, to protect yourself, you must take action that might appear harsh. I wish I could say that I left this experience with my faith in the company fully intact. That's not entirely true. Seeing how reluctant HRV until I forced their hand left me cynical about corporate structures. The system only acted when I created a big enough risk for them, by hinting at illegalities and possible public scandals. Had I just complained about poor treatment or toxic managers, it might have been brushed aside as interpersonal drama. So I learned that presenting an issue as a liability risk is often the only way to get big organizations to move. That's a cold lesson, but it's a lesson I'll carry with me. However, I remain proud that I persevered. I refused to let bullies push me off an important project that was central to my growth. I used every resource at my disposal to stand my ground. And in the end, Sarah is off the project. Mark is under a black cloud of a formal warning. And I get to keep on doing the work I care about without daily harassment. It's not a fairy tale ending with them fired and me dancing on the ashes of their careers, but it's enough for me to breathe freely. I got my life back, and in a sense, I got my revenge. In the months after, I kept adding entries to my diary, this time more about my personal reflections than wrongdoing. I wrote about the sense of relief, how different the team atmosphere felt, how people started trusting me with decisions instead of automatically scapegoating me. My daily stress levels dropped. I woke up in the morning not dreading the day, but excited to tackle new tasks. I realized how a single toxic manager plus a single bully can warp an entire environment. Removing them from positions of influence can be transformative. The last I heard, Mark's status within the company was still precarious. Rumors swirl about whether the legal department is monitoring him more closely, or if he's applying to other companies. Sarah apparently found a new internal project, smaller and less prestigious, and rumor says her new manager keeps a tight leash. Some people say the experience humbled her. Others say she's the same manipulative person, just more careful. I don't know if that's true. It might be that on another project she's repeating the pattern with a different scapegoat, but at least it's not me. I'm sure my story might come across as overly dramatic or far-fetched, but I have learned that in large corporations such drama can be surprisingly commonplace. Egos clash, people jockey for position, and a single lie repeated often can undermine your professional standing if you aren't vigilant. If you're reading this and you find yourself in a similar position, belittled by a supposed mentor, attacked by a toxic project manager, please remember you do not have to endure it indefinitely. Document everything. Build relationships with influential allies. When the time is right, push back. Sometimes corporate systems only respond to a loud enough alarm, and sometimes you have to ring that alarm yourself. In closing, let me reiterate that I hold no illusions about what I did. I had to become ruthless in my approach. I filed a heavily detailed complaint. I involved the legal office with strong insinuations, and I leveraged the company's fear of scandal to my advantage. None of that is nice, but it was the strategy that got results. Would I do it again if faced with the same situation? Yes, absolutely, because the alternative was letting bullies walk all over me and ruin my mental health indefinitely. So that's my story of revenge. Mark received a formal warning that effectively killed his future here. Sarah lost her position on the biggest project of her career, and I can now do my job free from daily harassment. It's not a Hollywood ending, but it's the kind of conclusion you get in the real corporate world. Messy, partial, and pragmatic. And for me, it's enough. I can hold my head high knowing I finally stood up for myself and prevailed.